I was the Jiang family's illegitimate daughter, the one who was never meant to stand in the light. And yet, in the attic, I was hiding my sister's fiancé, the crown prince of the realm. I'd meant to use my body to buy myself the thinnest chance of survival. Instead, I ended up carrying another man's child. When the grand princess showed dimples that could never have come from royal blood, the ending was already decided. Schemes and power plays, desire and lust. In this life-or-death wager within the deep palace, who would win? "Brother-in-law," I said, "do you only plan to marry my sister?" I hooked a finger around his sash. "Violet Jiang." Alexander Fu nearly ground his teeth to dust. "Can you stop calling me that? Are you planning to call me that for 100 years? 100 years is too long. When you die in my bed for real, I'll stop." Alexander Fu let out a sigh. Next month, he would march south to war. Before he left, he came to steal one last night with me. Why call it stealing? Because neither of us was married. And the place where we undressed and tangled ourselves together was the cramped attic above my boudoir. That attic had been meant for books. It sheltered the poems and classics my tutor had taught me for more than 10 years. But for the past 3 months, it had been hiding a man. My sister's man. My sister, Rose Jiang, was the Defender General's only legitimate daughter. Proper, lovely, learned, and polite. The sort of principal wife every man dreamed of. I was the Defender General's only illegitimate daughter. My mother was neither courtesan nor concubine. She had been my father's wet nurse. That's right, his wet nurse. Just saying it made my stomach churn. I was disgusted with them, disgusted with myself, disgusted with Alexander Fu on top of me. Alexander Fu, Alexander Fu. I dug my nails into the smooth, taut flesh of his back. He let out a low, pained sound, but he had no attention to spare. "When you come back, you'll marry Rose Jiang, won't you? She's the crown princess my father chose." "Then what am I?" "You're Violet Jiang," he said, as if it settled everything. I asked what I am. I didn't know where the strength came from, but I shoved him off to the side. I looked down at him from above, and from above I held him there. "Can we talk later?" he pleaded. I said nothing. I didn't let him move. Because only in moments like this was Alexander Fu at his weakest. First the crown prince's consort, then the imperial noble consort, then the holy empress dowager, then... "How do you know you'll outlive me? How could a demon die before a human?" My tone softened, and he seized the opening, pressing back in. I knew what I was, a demon who couldn't be shown in the light. A few months ago, when Alexander Fu came to present betrothal gifts to Rose Jiang, the mistress of the household smiled and said that a proper match required formal rites and a public wedding. A bride's family should send 10 miles of red dowry. That was the finest ending for a woman. Her gaze lingered on me, heavy with meaning. My mother stood there hunched and ashamed. She looked older than ever. I had none of that. I smiled back at the mistress, sweet as honey, and thought, just watch. Who was Alexander Fu going to marry in public? When I made that vicious vow, I didn't even know what Alexander Fu looked like, only that he was the man Rose Jiang would marry. Rose Jiang wasn't wrong, neither was he. If anything, they must have committed too many sins in a past life to end up crossing paths with me. After that night, Alexander Fu went off to war. The couch in my attic was full of the traces he left behind, full of his scent. He said, "Violet Jiang, you're not allowed to change the bedding, not allowed to wash it, not allowed to fold it. Otherwise you'll bring another man up here, and I won't even know." "I'm not allowed to bring another man?" I looked at him, challenging. "Not unless you want to die with him." He pulled on his boots and left without looking back. I truly hoped he would die on the battlefield. At least that would be better than dying in my bed. As for why Alexander Fu ended up in my bed, he explained it like this. Since he was young, all he ever saw were proper, serious women. The sight of well-bred ladies made him sick. So he came looking for someone like me, shameless. I asked why he didn't just go to a brothel and have his fill. He said that kind of cultivated depravity was too low. Only mine was natural. I took it as praise. Tying myself to the crown prince through the bedchamber wasn't so bad. After all, it was the chastest relationship I had in this world. Man and woman, pleasure and need. We were inside each other, and nothing else mattered. I wasn't like Rose Jiang. She could sit at home and have matchmakers lining up at her door. Someone like me could only die in a little attic, poisoned perhaps, or dead from a fall. Once I died, whatever secret filth my parents had made of me would be buried with my body and never see daylight again. No one wanted me to live, but I still had to live. If not Alexander Fu, then someone else. The emperor, the grand chancellor, even that minister whose beard had gone white. Any of them would do. Maybe because I had too many ways out, when he climbed through my window again at night, I was utterly calm. Violet Jiang, are you disappointed I'm still alive? I wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare means you want to, he said. He took off a helmet crusted with blood and mud. It hit the floor with a thud that nearly shook the attic. The war is over? No. Then you came back? I smiled brighter than if I'd become crown princess, just to sleep with me once. He closed his weary eyes and buried his face in my chest, saying nothing. The sharp bridge of his nose dug into my flesh, because he was pressing down hard. Why did you come back? I grabbed his hair and yanked. To see if you've been hooking up with another man. And if I have? He suddenly seized my shoulders and shoved me away. He didn't let go. His exhausted eyes turned feral. One more ghost under my blade won't make a difference. A short knife pressed to my throat. The cold made me shiver. The shiver raised gooseflesh. I haven't been with anyone else, I said. If I argued, I wouldn't get a second sentence. How do you prove it? He still wouldn't release me. Last time you left, the bed wasn't even disturbed. Other places worked too. Then kill me. I'll prove it with my death. I shut my eyes, hardened my heart, and stopped trying to reason with him. Alexander Fu flung the knife aside and began undoing my clothes. The war really isn't over? It isn't. Then what are you doing back here? I wasn't trying to provoke him. I was afraid he'd abandon the front line on a whim. If the country fell apart, I'd die even faster. I told you. I came to see if you've been with another man. Why would you care about a slut's virtue? A slut who slept with me sleeping with someone else is an insult to me. Alexander Fu came back from one battlefield and threw himself into another. The fighting lasted an hour. Afterward, he slipped back into that drained state, half asleep, barely able to keep his eyes open. He lifted my legs onto his waist, wrapped them around him, satisfied, and fell asleep. After a quiet moment, he suddenly said, Violet Jiang, you weren't lying. How can you tell? You missed me too, he said, smug as could be. By morning, when I opened my eyes, he was gone. Alexander Fu was finished. The moment he started craving my loyalty, he was finished. I could take his life, or I could live with him. For the first time in this story, I let out a long breath. So many girls cling to a man's promises and feelings. But those are the cheapest, least reliable things in the world. They aren't even as real as making him surrender in bed. I wanted Alexander Fu to take me away from the Jiang family, never to look back. Even if it meant leaving with Rose Jiang. But in the 3rd month of his southern campaign, I truly met another man. Not hooked up. Met. I drank all night on a painted pleasure barge on the shimmering river. But wine was water to me. I leaned against the railing and dozed only because I hadn't slept all night and was exhausted. A young gentleman called to me twice. When I didn't answer, he feared I'd fallen asleep and might tumble into the water, so he stepped onto the boat to check. Yet he was so drunk his feet wouldn't obey him. With a splash, he fell into the river. By the time his servant rowed over from the bank, the gentleman would have died far too young. I had no choice but to dive in and haul him out. The night wind cut through us, making us shiver. It sobered him, and it drove away my drowsiness. Thank you for saving my life, miss, he said, wiping water from his face. I'm Ethan Ann. My father is Henry Ann, Vice Minister of Revenue. People usually follow saving my life with, I'll repay you with myself, I teased. His face was so solemn I couldn't resist. I didn't expect the boy's pale, cool face to flush all at once. I felt a twinge of guilt. I was too used to trading vicious, filthy words with Alexander Fu. I'd nearly forgotten how ordinary men and women spoke. Enough, I said. My father is the cavalry general, the Jiang one. Ethan Ann looked delighted. Not Rose Jiang, I said, knowing exactly what he was thinking. How could she be out in the middle of the night? I spoke without thinking. The Jiang family having another young lady is normal. I'm not exactly another young lady. My mother was my father's wet nurse. He seemed to be working out what that meant. Well, disgusting, isn't it? I stared into his eyes, waiting. Disgusting. Ethan Ann said, utterly serious. But that's them being disgusting. It has nothing to do with Miss Jiang. It has nothing to do with me. Then what am I like? Kind-hearted and beautiful, quick and clever. You're drunk, young Master Ann. Go home. I wrung the water from my skirt, then hopped onto the bank and walked off without looking back. I still don't know Miss Jiang's name, he called, his voice urgent. Violet Jiang, I said, afraid he hadn't heard. Z as in purple, Fu as in hibiscus. But there had never been purple hibiscus in this world. By the time I reached home, my head was already hot. I dragged out a tub, boiled the water myself, and bathed. I covered my face with a towel and lay back with my eyes closed. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about him. Alexander Fu called me shameless. The mistress called me a bastard. My father called me an abomination. Kind-hearted and beautiful. Quick and clever. It was the first time I'd ever heard such words about myself. He knew I was the Jiang family's hidden shame, and he still said them. Either he was lying to me, or he loved me. We'd known each other less than half an hour. Loving me was unlikely. So he must have been lying to a pathetic girl. I wanted to hear him lie again, but I probably wouldn't, because Alexander Fu would return in triumph next month. After he won, he would marry. And with his achievements, he would ask the emperor to grant him an additional consort. Yet he had said, Violet Jiang, I don't actually want to marry you. A wife is worse than a concubine. A concubine is worse than stealing. Stealing is worse than not being able to steal at all, I said coldly, pushing at his burning chest. I was just talking, he said, tightening his arms around me. You're so petty. With a mind that narrow, you're not suited to be anyone's concubine. Yeah? I said. I only want to be a principal wife. If I could decide, you could be my grandmother for all I care. Alexander Fu sighed. Do you have any idea? To bring you into my household, I offended my father and yours. Alexander Fu, aren't you afraid saying that will shorten your life? I burst out laughing. Sleeping with you counts as doing something for you, he said, laughing too. He would marry Rose Jiang as crown princess, and on top of that, he would grant me the title of consort. When the news reached the manor, the three of them were eating, because when my father stormed into my courtyard, there was still a lump of crab roe stuck to his beard. Violet Jiang, have you no shame? Why don't I have any shame? If you hadn't seduced the crown prince like some shameless thing, would he even know you existed? He glared as if he meant to bore holes through me. You're right. I seduced him, and now Alexander Fu would rather disgrace you than give me up. He loves me like he's lost his mind. The old man was so furious he slapped me hard enough to send me to the ground. If you don't have the guts to beat me to death, then don't hit me again. What did you say? He looked as if he couldn't believe his own ears. Otherwise, when I become Empress Dowager, the first thing I'll do is wipe out your whole clan. I got up and knotted the tear in my skirt closed. Do you want to know how I'll become Empress Dowager? I said, I'll poison Rose Jiang and become crown princess. When the emperor dies, I'll be empress. When Alexander Fu dies, I'll be Empress Dowager. Silence. After a long time, I saw terror creep across my father's face. But clearly, it wasn't because of what I'd said. The secondness has gone mad, he told the servants around him. If you take a madwoman's words seriously and spread them, you'll lose your heads. The pack of bullies who had come so righteously to accuse me scattered in panic. Was a madwoman really that frightening? Still, if it let me live the remainder of my days in peace in this hellhole, it wasn't so bad. The mistress's talk of 10 miles of red dowry turned out to be even more extravagant. Just for Rose Jiang's wedding robes, the household invited the 8 best embroiderers from Silk Harmony Atelier. The garments were breathtakingly lavish. Red that dazzled, gold that flashed. I had no gold, and I couldn't wear true red. I could only wear rose red. When my mother measured me, she sighed. Vivi has a full chest and a slender waist. In the future, your husband will surely like you. I thought, I've already had him liking me in the attic above the library for more nights than I can count. She knew everything, yet she pretended she was only an ordinary mother sewing wedding clothes for an ordinary girl. Let her. Perhaps we would never see each other again. On the night before Alexander Fu's wedding, the manor was still roaring with celebration, laughter and music deep into the night. I didn't know why, but my heart felt restless, scorched raw. I slipped out the back gate and wandered the streets. As if fate had set this trial in my path, my feet carried me to the shimmering river. Moonlight turned the water to rippling silver. On the pleasure barges, singers crooned soft love songs. I was listening, lost in it, when a voice bright with delight snapped me back. "Miss Jiang." A figure on a boat waved at me. As it drew closer, I realized it was the one I usually rowed. And closer still, I recognized Ethan An. I stepped onto his boat. "Miss Jiang seems to like coming out at night. You were waiting for me?" I hated wasted time. "Yes," Ethan An said. "I couldn't forget you." His eyes were like a puppy's, loyal and innocent. He just looked at me. A flicker of softness passed through my heart. Only a flicker. It's no use. Tomorrow I'm marrying someone as a concubine. Miss Jiang looks down on me. "That's why you'd say something like that," he said. The puppy eyes stayed bright. "The crown prince is getting married tomorrow. You know that, right?" "I do." "I'm marrying him too," I said. "They think it's too shameful, so no one knows." At last, the light in his eyes went out. And suddenly, I was unbearably sad. Sadder than if my husband had died on my wedding night. If I'd met this man before Alexander Fu ever climbed into my bed, would he have asked to marry me as his principal wife? Then I would wear true red too. Even without 8 embroiderers from Silk Harmony Atelier stitching gold thread for me, I would still outshine the entire capital city. As if possessed, I heard myself say, "Ethan An, let's sleep together once. No one has ever called me kind-hearted and beautiful. You said it, and I'll never forget you. And I want you to never forget me either." I thought he would refuse, call me filthy. But he said, "You saved my life. I'll repay you with myself." Good. Repaying me with himself was best. Just don't give me your heart with it. I didn't want that. A true heart was like honey. Who doesn't love sweetness? But some sweets are poisoned. Eat them, and you die. Better something bitter. Moonlight spilled into the cabin. In that pale light, I undressed. Cold seeped in, and I couldn't help shivering. Ethan An still didn't move. He stared at my body as if he were watching a goddess descend. But tonight, I didn't want to be a goddess. I only wanted to be a slut. I let the last piece of underclothes fall and walked to him. In that moment, nothing in the world could buy it. I kept feeling he was different from Alexander Fu. After a short while, that feeling sharpened into certainty. My mind cleared. He had never touched a woman before. I was his first. He gave his virginity to me. My tears fell into the hollow of his neck. For the first time, I regretted my sins. When I was little, I used to steal the mistress's jewelry in secret to sell for money. I snapped the carved tobacco pipe my father had paid dearly for, just to make him hurt. Their misery made me happy. But now I regretted it, regretted drawing close to someone so pure, like the white moon above our heads. "Jiang." Ethan hesitated, then corrected himself. "Vivi, don't cry. Are you worried you won't be able to marry the crown prince? Don't be afraid. I'll go to Jiang Manor and ask to marry you as my principal wife." Vivi. So my name could sound this good. Principal wife. Yes, that sounded good too. But for this absurd request, Alexander Fu had volunteered for the Southern Campaign. He had crawled back through heaps of bones. How could he possibly let me go? I remembered how I used to ask him, spoiled and proud, "Alexander Fu, what if I hook up with another man?" "You'll die together," he would say with a smile. Every time. I was bad and hateful. If I died, maybe no one would cry. But Ethan An, someone that good, how could he? I stopped crying. I said nothing. He thought I'd accepted his promise and felt safe, so he began asking about this and that. "Vivi, what happened here?" "This? I got burned when I was little. And here. I fell when I was little. And here, stabbed when I was little. Why were you always getting hurt as a child?" "I don't know." "Vivi, I'll protect you forever. I'll never let you get hurt again." "All right," I said. Later, I lay in his arms until the sky began to pale. Then I dressed and went home. I changed into my rose-red wedding clothes. I did my hair and makeup. I climbed into a small bridal sedan. I left Jiang Manor, never to return. And what happened the night before I married into the Eastern Palace, I never dared to think about too closely. The Crown Prince's wedding day was, naturally, a time of celebration across the realm. A hero and a beauty, a perfect match. Who wouldn't envy it? Who wouldn't talk about it? When Alexander Fu came to my room, he offered me a single compliment. "Violet Jiang, you look good in this outfit. The color is sweet and seductive. He was only stopping by to greet an old lover. On the wedding night, of course he would go to the crown princess. I removed my makeup, unpinned my hair, changed, and went to sleep. I never expected to see him again that night. I was deep in a sweet dream when someone flung back the quilt, letting in a gust of icy air. "Violet Jiang, you didn't wait for me." He stripped off his outer robe and slid in beside me, his breath still carrying the bite of wine. "What? Did the crown princess throw you out?" I burrowed into his arms to steal back the warmth I'd lost. Looking at her makes me think of my own mother. Alexander Fu looked as if a nightmare had just resurfaced. How touching. She's dignified and severe like a Buddha. I wouldn't dare profane her. I couldn't hold back my laugh. Then if she's a Buddha, what am I? You're a demon who drains people dry. Someday, I'll drain you to the last drop. Rose Jiang had probably never been disliked for being proper and restrained. The former mistress always said it was a phoenix's fate, the bearing of an empress. But plenty of empresses have fallen at the hands of seductive consorts. Before I could think any further, Alexander Fu insisted I get up and put the wedding robe back on. He even made me wear the floral crown. He said it wasn't as fun unless he unwrapped it himself. I refused. I was lying there perfectly fine and couldn't be bothered. But he rolled me up, quilt and all, and carried me to the bronze mirror. I had no choice but to give in. "Today is no ordinary day," Alexander Fu said, leaning to the side as he watched me paint a flower ornament between my brows. "Oh? Starting today, we're not sneaking around anymore." He thought for a moment, then added, "Now we can do it openly, broad daylight and all." Even though I was used to his shameless mouth, my hand still shook. I ruined the last petal of the lotus. He didn't even wait for me to wipe it off and redo it. In the chaos, hairpins, bracelets, and powders clattered off the dressing table and scattered across the floor. By the time he'd undressed me down to my underlayer, a strange thought came over me. Last night, Ethan Ann was afraid I'd catch cold, and he insisted on warming my underlayer before letting me put it on. Spring nights were still bitterly cold. That warmth was hard to forget. I drifted for only a moment, and Alexander Fu noticed at once. He asked sharply, "Violet Jiang, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about what the crown princess will say to blame me tomorrow." I wound myself around him, soft and clinging. "I'm just a lowly consort now. My words don't carry weight." "Then shouldn't you try your hardest to please me and beg me to protect you?" "You're absolutely right." Once or twice, I could talk my way out of it. But over time, if I didn't stay alert, he would start to suspect. Someone like me shouldn't be anything but clear-headed. Before dawn, I had to get up again. Alexander Fu pinned me down and demanded to know what I was doing. A consort, of course, had to go pay her respects to the crown princess. I knew I could use Alexander Fu as an excuse and stay in bed. But this was the first moment in my life when I'd beaten Rose Jiang. How could I miss it? I dressed in full makeup and fine clothes, my silk collar framing a slender waist, all charm and sway, soft, alluring. Rose Jiang was still dressed like a proper person. After we exchanged formal greetings, seats were granted. I called her sister. I said, "Sister, I didn't expect that after marriage we'd still be sisters. Fate really is wondrous." "Yes," she said, her face full of hope. "Sisters supporting each other will surely bring glory to the family." She really was made to be an empress. Is that how one should act, so gracious and open, when faced with the petty games of a concubine? But I liked ruining people like that. Perfectly pure, perfectly good. Because she was too good. She made me look like a sewer rat. I wanted to ruin her, the way I once stole the mistress's jewelry and snapped my father's pipe. As long as Alexander Fu spent a night in her palace, the next night I would lean into my combative nature. I would cling to him until he couldn't breathe. Sometimes he'd be so exhausted he'd barely wanted to attend morning court. The emperor would scold him. Over time, he didn't dare stay in Rose Jiang's quarters anymore. Maybe he felt it looked bad to neglect the Jiang family's legitimate daughter. He often ate dinner with her, then came back to sleep with me. The servants in the Eastern Palace secretly called it eating in the East, sleeping in the West. I thought it only made her look even worse, and I loved it. Life when you're favored and spoiled is very happy. Back then, I strutted through the Eastern Palace like I owned it. After a while, even that grew boring. The place was too small. Someone who'd slept with her brother-in-law before she even married could never get used to living like a bird in a cage. If I went out the proper way, a swarm of nannies and maids would follow. It was tedious. Luckily, I found a stretch of back wall that was low and crumbling. Climb over it and walk a bit, and you'd reach the bustling streets. From then on, the sky was wide, and I could fly. I started a delightful new life of slipping out whenever I pleased. But when you get too smug, trouble follows. That day, I jumped down from the wall with 2 bags of osmanthus cakes. I hadn't even found my footing when I saw Alexander Fu and Rose Jiang walking the Empress through the garden. Inside the wall, the plantings were sparse and the ground bare. There was nowhere to hide. I and my osmanthus cakes stood there, utterly at a loss. At that moment, Rose Jiang suddenly rushed over, snatched the cakes from my hands, and scolded me with a pout. "You said you wouldn't eat any. Why did you go and buy them again?" She turned back and smiled apologetically at the Empress. My younger sister always loved wandering about at home, but she still remembers I like the pastries from Spring Clay Confectionery. I'm sorry to make you laugh. I'll discipline her properly later and make her rein in her temper. Before the Empress could even respond, Rose Jiang turned and snapped at me. "Hurry back to your palace and reflect on your mistakes." I bowed and ran off. Heavens! She'd beaten me again with that virtuous mask. I was furious. Even worse, my osmanthus cakes were still in her hands. But that incident changed my original plan to fight her to the death. In the vast Eastern Palace, there were only Rose Jiang and me, one virtuous wife, one beautiful concubine. She managed the household. I warmed the bed. I was afraid that if I got her killed, I'd have to manage the household and warm the bed. Lying with a smile to the Empress as the head matron, that kind of work should stay hers. Maybe because I had too little to do, I'd become extremely sleepy these past 2 weeks. Often, after Alexander Fu got up, I slept straight through until after lunch. If I missed mealtime, the small kitchen would make a special meal just for me. So I ate more and slept more every day. One day, Alexander Fu said to me with grave seriousness, "Violet Jiang, your waist is gone." He even dragged me to the mirror to make me look. When I looked, it wasn't just my waist. I seemed to have grown a small belly, too. Was I about to lose my looks and with them his affection? I was anxious, but also excited. Maybe he'd soon bring other beauties back to the Eastern Palace. Then I'd finally have rivals to fight. With that thought, I wasn't sleepy in the mornings anymore. I couldn't eat as much. I even hired an instructor to teach me dance. But the more I danced, the fatter I got. Especially my belly. It grew bigger and bigger. Was this punishment for all my wrongdoing? At last, my instructor said pointedly, "Consort Jiang, don't come tomorrow. Have the imperial physician come and take your pulse." Fine. I wanted to know why I couldn't slim down. The old imperial physician looked as if he couldn't stand to see me this foolish. "Consort? You aren't fat. You're pregnant." So there was another person inside my body. The absurd thing was that Alexander Fu and I shared a bed night after night. Sometimes he'd stroke my waist and sigh that the feeling of holding it with one hand was gone forever. I was irritated, but there was nothing I could do. "This child is tough," the physician said. "With all that roughness, the pregnancy is still very stable at 5 months." In an instant, I went from a young married woman to a young pregnant woman. After Alexander Fu found out, he didn't seem happy. "How long does it take to have a child?" "I've heard they stay in the belly for 10 months. That really is hard to endure." The one who had to endure was me. Rose Jiang insisted on forcing me to eat all kinds of bland, healthful dishes. I suspected she was poisoning me, but she took a bite, then offered me a bite. I had nothing left to say. Was anyone really that broad-minded? Did she truly believe that as long as the child's maternal family was the Jiangs, it should be protected? After 5 months of swallowing pregnancy-stabilizing medicine and eating those nourishing meals, the child finally arrived. But the moment I looked at her, my heart leapt into my throat. She had a pair of beautiful dimples, but I had no dimples. Alexander Fu had none either. Among everyone I knew, only the young gentleman on the painted pleasure barge, the one who called me Vivi, had dimples like that. That thought nearly killed me. Seeing my expression change, the imperial physician panicked. He took out ginseng slices and told me to hold them in my mouth. No. No. That night, Alexander Fu came after finishing his work. He held the baby for a long time, then said with disdain, "So ugly. Violet Jiang, you wouldn't let me touch you for 5 whole months, and this is what you grew in there." He poked the baby's cheek with a finger. After a moment's thought, he added, "Maybe she'll be prettier when she smiles. If she's ugly, you think it's only my fault? Why don't you look for the reason in yourself?" I snatched the baby back from his arms and wouldn't let him touch her again. He didn't stay the night. I sat beside the child and didn't sleep at all. With her eyes shut, she nursed quietly. Her movements were gentle, as if she were afraid of hurting me. I gave her a formal name, Grace Fu. There had never been anyone so gentle and beautiful inside the palace. Only outside it. I loved her. I loved her so much. Because she came from my belly, someone who belonged completely to me, my own flesh and blood. Alexander Fu might have complained, but he still hosted a grand banquet for Grace Fu's 1-month celebration. That day, Rose Jiang dressed with great ceremony. On paper, this child was the eldest daughter of Rose Jiang and Alexander Fu. I didn't appear. I hid in a side hall and watched them through a screen. My Grace Fu was a beautiful child. She would surely bring them honor. The banquet was lively. The officials offered every kind of flattery and every kind of gift. Everyone was beaming. Just as they raised their cups to celebrate, Grace Fu suddenly began to cry. No one could soothe her. Rose Jiang murmured something to the Empress, and the Empress nodded reluctantly. Then a nanny came to the side hall to invite me out. "The princess is crying. Maybe she isn't used to being away from her mother. Consort Jiang, hurry and go hold her." The moment she reached me, she smiled. Her dimples spun like little whirlpools. Only then did I understand. My Grace Fu only wanted to make me proud. Alexander Fu sidled up as if showing me off. "This is the princess's birth mother, Consort Jiang." The officials immediately praised how Grace Fu resembled me, which was why she was so beautiful. Amid the clinking of cups, the corner of my eye caught one person sitting stiffly. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. I nearly lost my grip and dropped Grace Fu. If that man smiled, he would have dimples just like hers. Alexander Fu saw my sudden panic. He reached out and took the child from me without saying a word. My heart hammered out of control. I could only force it down and keep smiling as if nothing had happened. It seemed he had entered official service. I was a concubine in the Eastern Palace. Unless something went wrong, we would never meet again in this lifetime. When Grace Fu was just learning to walk, the emperor died. Alexander Fu ascended the throne, and Rose Jiang moved into the central palace as empress. Because I had borne the eldest princess, I was promoted from consort to noble consort. Honestly, that rank was too high. Whether among commoners or at court, rumors and gossip spread about my past. People predicted I had the makings of a femme fatale who would bring ruin to the state. After hearing it enough times, I started to feel that if I didn't do something, I'd be letting them down. Alexander Fu only told me as a joke. He never discussed state affairs with me. Only once was there an exception. The Vice Minister of Revenue's son was outstanding in the palace exam back then. So young, with limitless prospects. Is that so? I pretended to be interested. "His name is Ethan An. Have you met him?" He stared at me with a wolf's eyes. "Alexander Fu. Grace Fu is his child." He pronounced the sentence before I could speak. "At her first birthday ceremony, you saw him and looked like you'd seen a ghost. Lately, I see him at court, then I come back and look at Grace Fu. They look so alike, I can't help having nightmares. If you won't admit it, we can do a blood test." He didn't even give me room to lie. All these years, I've never seen him again. Spare Grace Fu. Grace Fu is my life. Just spare me too, all right? I was terrified. So terrified I was nearly stupid. I begged him even though I knew he wouldn't soften. He laughed at my naivete. I grabbed the fruit knife from the table. Inside my belly now is the imperial eldest son. This time it's mine again? Can your words still be trusted? I plunged the knife into my stomach. Blood seeped between my fingers and dripped onto the carpet. "If you don't believe me, I'll cut him out and show you. We'll use his blood for the test." Alexander Fu panicked and tried to wrench the knife from my hand. I dragged it down another inch. "Alexander Fu, spare Grace Fu." He said nothing. "Another inch." "Fine. Promise me." "I promise." "Promise what?" "I promise I'll spare Grace Fu." I threw the knife away and let him press on the wound while he shouted for the imperial physicians. In truth, I had only cut the skin. I wouldn't hurt the child. The blood just looked frightening. Rose found out and cursed me viciously. I hold grudges, I said. If you keep yelling at me, once I give birth to the prince, I'll find a way to steal your position as empress. With your body, you still want to steal the empress's seat? Try living longer than I do first. She was right. My health was getting worse by the day. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but ever since I cut myself and lost that blood, I always felt cold. At night, if Alexander Fu was there, I couldn't stop myself from pressing against him for warmth. He would quietly shift away. He promised to spare Grace Fu, but he never promised to spare me. Before, when he knew I carried Grace Fu, he was willing to endure. This time, he was like a madman. Every night, after handling state affairs, he came to torment me. He didn't light the lamps, as if in the dark he wouldn't have to face my hateful face. It was as though he meant to tear me apart and devour me. Again and again he asked, "Violet Jiang, did Ethanon treat you like this too?" I clenched my teeth and said nothing. He yanked my hair. So I had to say, "No, he's not as good as you." Alexander Fu smiled, satisfied. But the laughter wasn't happy. Night after night, I slept poorly. I only grew more exhausted. When winter came, I couldn't even leave the room. All day I hugged a warming pot and sat by the charcoal brazier. Grace Fu wasn't an energetic child. She stayed by my side all day, keeping me company. I loved watching her smile. Tell her something amusing and her dimples would spin. She was young, but she seemed to carry too many thoughts. Once, when I woke from a nap, I heard her tugging at Rose Jiang's sleeve and asking anxiously, "Your Majesty, why is my mother's belly getting bigger, but she's getting thinner?" Rose Jiang comforted her, because there was a little brother growing in her belly. I don't want a little brother. I want my mother. Behind the gauze curtains, I watched her tightly furrowed brow and nearly cried. The daughter I bore didn't know how bad I was. She didn't know how people despised me. She only knew I was her mother, and we loved each other. The Victor Fu in my belly would never love me the way she did. He chose the day with the fiercest wind and snow to come into this world. He knew I feared the cold. He was punishing me on Alexander Fu's behalf. I was so cold I could barely speak. Alexander Fu and Rose Jiang stayed at my bedside. "Alexander Fu, if you're still angry, then kill Ethan An. I haven't seen him in ages. Ask him if he wants to die with me." "Rose, other than seducing your husband, I never harmed you in any other way, right? I'll give you this child as compensation. Forgive me, the two of you can bring glory to the family together. When you become Empress Dowager, just don't forget to repair my tomb. No one is allowed to hurt Grace Fu. If you do, I'll come back as a vengeful ghost and haunt you." I poured out everything I wanted to say like hailstones. What they said in return, I could no longer hear. This world is so cold. I want to sleep. In the 3rd year of Yuan Hui, noble consort Jiang died. The emperor and empress were grief-stricken. She was posthumously titled Empress Huizi. Later, whenever the palace spoke of an especially cold winter, they would say, "It's so cold this year." Almost as cold as the year Empress Huizi gave birth to the crown prince. Every time Rose Jiang heard those words, it felt as if a piece of her heart had gone missing. That madwoman was dead, yet she seemed to have stolen everyone's heart. Rose Jiang had no children. With Victor Fu, left to her by Violet, she held the position of empress steadily. Violet had long since repaid any debt she owed. Alexander Fu, on the other hand, lived freely. Beauties throughout the palace accompanied him, amused him, and kept the nights filled with song. One night he was drunk. Rose Jiang went to deliver sobering soup. He seized her hand and demanded stubbornly, what did she mean by it? Grace Fu was her life? Wasn't Victor Fu the same? She looked down on my child that much? Rose Jiang tried to pull her hand back. She couldn't, so she had to listen as he went on. And she wanted Ethan An to die with her. What a dream. "I'll make Ethan An my close minister, so I see him every day. I'll make him know there's someone named Grace Fu. But I'll never let father and daughter recognize each other." Rose Jiang thought to herself. Violet's final move was brilliant. After that, Alexander Fu held the realm and the beauties. Rose Jiang held steady as empress. Ethan An had a glorious future. Everyone lived well. Extra before I turned 4, I lived in Jiangnan's most famous mistwater house. My mother entertained guests in the front hall. I ate the leftover osmanthus cakes in the back kitchen. Then one day, a woman stormed in. She wore splendid clothes and a head full of jewels. She yanked my mother by the hair and scratched her face with jeweled nail guards. She demanded to know what nerve my mother had to seduce the cavalry general. I set down the plate of cakes, walked over, and bit her wrist. She was furious. But when she saw my face, she froze. She didn't even pull away. She is still a daughter of the Jiang family. Keeping her in a place like this is improper. Please, madam, take her back to the manor and raise her properly. I've forgotten most of what they said. Only those 2 lines still echo years later, over and over, as I turn them in my mind. Because after that, my life almost changed entirely because of that decision. Before then, my best prospect was to become the youngest dancer at Mistwater House. If I became famous, I might marry a rich young man as his concubine. But I gained a new name, Rose Jiang, and a new identity, the Jiang Manor's eldest legitimate daughter. This girl was born with a phoenix's fate. 100 fortune tellers would study my face and say it 1,000 ways. I formed memories early. I remembered everything at Mistwater House. But I pretended I was too young, and I convinced myself I truly was born of the madam. From the moment I entered, I quietly wondered what sin this family had committed. Aside from me, they had only one other daughter. That little girl was named Violet Jiang. In those years, I learned every rule for women, every moral lesson. I learned music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. I learned needlework and embroidery. I learned song, dance, and the pipa. The sea of learning truly had no shore. To keep my figure, I wasn't allowed to eat much. Often I was so hungry my heart raced and I couldn't fall asleep. But father and mother never demanded anything of Violet. She grew wild like a weed, coming and going like a stray cat. I envied her. Sometimes my dance instructor wouldn't let me eat dinner. At midnight, when Violet slipped back in through the back door, she would always bring me pastries from Springclay Confectionery. We were still little then. In such a huge general's residence, we were the only 2 children. Loneliness was inevitable, so was clinging to each other. Hiding in the library with her, chatting and eating snacks, was my most treasured time after a day of heavy lessons. But later, the madam told me not to get too close to Violet. With my status and hers, it wasn't appropriate. What status did she have? I didn't dare ask the madam. So I questioned everyone, my maid, my wet nurse, the servants, the cook. No one answered. They hesitated and avoided my gaze. It only fueled my curiosity. At last I couldn't stand it and asked Violet myself, "Is your mother concubine Chen or concubine Jiang? Why do I never see you go visit them?" I assumed Violet's mother, like mine, couldn't raise her daughter in person. I never expected that question to kick over a hornet's nest. "Neither," she said. "Do you know Nanny Jiang? Father's wet nurse." "Yes." Her expression turned cold. "She's my mother." After she said that, she turned and walked away. I regretted my recklessness in silence, but I didn't know what to say. It was Violet who saw through my thoughts. "Rose Jiang, you don't need to blame yourself. It has nothing to do with you. But you're the eldest young lady, and I'm a child with no name and no standing. I can't play with you anymore. Just treat it as my fault." After that, no matter how late I practiced dance, the back door never opened again for a little girl sneaking in with pastries hidden in her arms. But sometimes, yes, sometimes, I would trip over a bag of osmanthus cakes left by the doorway. I studied like that, day and night, until 16. At last I became a celebrated talented lady in the capital city. On the day of the Empress Dowager's birthday, the madam hinted that I should compose poems, write calligraphy, play music, and dance. I truly stole the show. Before I'd even returned to the manor, the imperial decree arrived, appointing me crown princess. At that time, I was the hottest topic in tea houses and taverns on every street. People said, "If you have a daughter, let her be like Rose Jiang." The madam looked at me with the satisfaction of someone who planted melons and harvested gold beans. As I expected, my eye was not wrong. I was to marry the crown prince of the dynasty. The crown prince was named Alexander Fu. Right up until I stepped into the Eastern Palace, I never expected this. He used his military achievements to request Violet Jiang as his secondary consort. The madam ground her teeth. In the end, that little slut still came out ahead and slipped through the cracks. To my surprise, I actually felt a trace of satisfaction. I wasn't close with Alexander Fu, and we might not get along in the future. But I knew Violet well. Living with someone familiar, watching out for each other, nothing could be better. A few days before my wedding, the manor hired the best embroiderers from Silk Harmony Atelier to make my bridal gown. They measured me and had me try it on day after day. It was exhausting. Once I went to the embroiderer's workroom to check on the progress. I arrived just as the madam had called them away. The room was empty. I saw Violet staring at the gown with undisguised envy. Her eyes traced the phoenix in flight, embroidered in heavy gold thread. She was so absorbed that she reached out and touched it. I was about to slip out quietly when the head embroiderer suddenly came back. "Second miss," she cried. "This is the Crown Princess's wedding gown. Not just anyone may lay hands on it." She even pried Violet's fingers open before she could pull her hand away. I had no choice but to step in. No matter how precious the gown is, it isn't more precious than a person. "Master Li, Violet is a daughter of Jiang Manor. In the future, we sisters will enter the Eastern Palace together. Isn't this way of handling things improper?" Only then did she lower her eyes and apologize to Violet. But Violet only looked at me. After a long moment, she smiled. "So this is the bearing of the main wife, Rose Jiang." The next time we spoke was after the wedding, when she came to pay her respects. To be honest, with my skill in chin, chess, calligraphy, painting, singing, dancing, and pipa, I had no common ground with Alexander Fu at all. He truly wasn't a man of learning. He didn't like me, and I didn't like him either. Whenever we attended banquets together, I secretly prayed he wouldn't say something crude and cutting and make me, the capital city's #1 talented woman, lose face. But life in the Eastern Palace was unbearably idle. Violet must have felt the same, because every day she declared she was going to battle me in palace schemes. I thought that no matter how idle we were, we shouldn't waste time on petty nonsense. I began to study household management in earnest. The vast Eastern Palace, its daily expenses from top to bottom, the training and management of guards and maids, the currents of favor and influence, all of it fascinated me. Before long, the Emperor and Empress praised my ability to manage affairs. For someone as unreliable as Alexander Fu to inherit the throne smoothly, I deserved at least 30% of the credit. After Grace Fu was born, I realized raising a child was even more interesting than running a household. Under my pressure, Violet ate everything the imperial physician told her to. In the end, she delivered a fair, lovely little girl. It was astonishing. Violet was indignant. "Rose Jiang, I worked myself to the bone to have a child, and somehow it feels like I had her for you. We're sisters. Why draw lines between yours and mine? If only life could have gone on like that." But later, Alexander Fu had a fierce argument with Violet in her quarters. I was afraid she'd think I was there to enjoy the spectacle, so I didn't ask. More than a month passed. Then she came to me and said, "Rose, I'm pregnant again." I was stunned. The imperial physician had said that giving birth to Grace had damaged her vitality, and she shouldn't conceive easily for the next 2 years. I begged for medicine to make it happen. She said with a bleak smile, "Rose, Grace isn't Alexander Fu's child. He found out. Do you not like Grace anymore? Do you think I'm the same as my mother?" Seeing my silence, she suddenly lost control. "No, I will always love her because she is yours." "That's good. This one is most likely a boy. I had the best doctors confirm it. I told Alexander Fu that if he dares lay a hand on Grace, I'll cut this child out and show it to him." She would do it, and Alexander Fu knew she would. With this second pregnancy, I had the experience of when Grace was in my belly, so my care was flawless. But Violet still grew thinner by the day. Once autumn came, she kept saying she was cold. She held a brazier all day, warming herself by the fire. As her due date neared, she was so weak she could barely speak. I knew it. If she insisted on carrying this child, she likely wouldn't survive. But once you've come this far, there's no road back. I chose the name Victor Fu. He entered the world, and his mother left it. Unlucky child, I thought bitterly. That day, the wind and snow raged. The room was filled with Victor's cries and the scent of plum blossoms, sharp as snapped branches. Alexander Fu and I looked at each other in despair. Her posthumous title was chosen by me as well. More than once, when we bickered, she would say, "Rose Jiang, if I had your birth and background, I'd be kind and beautiful, sharp and clever. I wouldn't be worse than you. Then let it be wise and kind." Empress Huisi. The wedding gown I wore on my wedding day, I let her wear it as she left. If she loved that brilliant bridal red and the gold-embroidered phoenix soaring to the heavens, then let her wear it forever. Alexander Fu was an unpleasant man, but he was a decent emperor. Later, even as the palace filled with far more women, he never neglected state affairs. Ethan Ann. Violet mentioned that name before she died. He should be Grace's biological father. I will never let him know any of this. Only if he doesn't know, can Grace remain a princess forever. Days passed, one after another. Plain, without crisis. I had a son and a daughter. I didn't need to compete for Alexander Fu's favor, and there was no risk of my being deposed. For that, I truly should thank Violet. Since girlhood, I'd had to learn this and that. I'd had to compete with the capital city's talented young women and fight for the spotlight. Now that I was getting old, I truly couldn't fight anymore. Aside from managing the harem, I taught Grace the things she liked. Too much talent can make a person unhappy, so she didn't need to learn everything. Days passed, one after another, until my hair turned white and Alexander Fu's face deepened with creases. The palace hadn't seen a young beauty in a long time. After many years, the children around me became Victor's children. I held a chubby, pale baby and strolled through the palace. Without meaning to, I wandered to the area outside the imperial study. Faintly, I heard two old men arguing at the top of their lungs. "Minister On, don't go too far. These people have followed me for years, and they're all quite capable." No matter how capable, what use are they if they aren't loyal to the court? If you don't kill one to warn the rest, everything will fall apart. But Miles Fu is Prince Yuanhui's son. How am I supposed to explain this? Put it on my head. Haven't we made it through the years like this? Humph. I smiled to myself, held the child close, and quietly walked away.